Tonight, at least 39 dead at Mexico-U.S. border migrant center. The news comes after Biden proposed restrictions last month on migrants seeking asylum in the U.S. It is believed there were 70 migrants in the center, mostly Venezuelans. And a new study shows anti-Muslim discrimination in the healthcare sector in Canada, the US, and the UK. According to the study, Muslim women and girls are afraid of getting medical help. We also look at students of an Islamic school in Calgary raise funds for earthquake victims. US rejects accusations it is supporting Israel's protests. And why does an Amnesty report call the West's response to the Ukraine war a double standard? Assalamu alaikum, good evening. This is Muslim News Canada on Muslim Network TV. I am Catherine Bullock. In a developing story, a man suspected of killing two women in an Ismaili Muslim center in Lisbon, Portugal, has been shot and injured by the police, reports a media source. Police were called to the scene late this morning. They encountered a suspect with a large knife. They shot the suspect as he approached them. He was taken to the hospital where he remains in police custody. According to the Ismaili community leader, the women were Portuguese staff members at the center. Several other people have been injured. However, there are no details available about them. Portugal's Prime Minister Antonio Costa calls the incident a, quote, criminal act. At least 39 migrants have died in a fire that broke out at an immigration detention center in Ciudad Juarez, a Mexican city on the U.S. border near El Paso, Texas, says the Mexican government. A rescuer whose identity has not been disclosed told a media source there are around 70 migrants, mostly Venezuelans, at the center. Numerous migrants have been detained in the center in recent days after local authorities rounded up street vendors, some of whom were foreigners from the area. A heavy military and National Guard presence blanketed the site earlier today. Ciudad Juarez is one of the border towns where numerous undocumented migrants seeking refuge in the United States remain stranded. Biden proposed new restrictions on asylum seekers in February. The rules say migrants who arrive at the border and simply cross into the United States will no longer be eligible for asylum unless they apply online via a US government app in any of the countries they go through. In Biden's recent visit to Canada, the two trade partners also decided to turn back asylum seekers from the US-Canada border. The International Labour Organization, also known as the ILO, has called for urgent support for hundreds of thousands of workers who lost their livelihoods in Turkey and Syria after last month's earthquakes. In a press release, the ILO says workers and enterprises urgently need help to rebuild livelihoods and prevent poverty, informality, and exploitation. The news comes after an assessment carried out by the ILO on the impact of the disaster on the labor market. Initial data from Turkey suggests the earthquake left more than 658,000 workers unable to earn their living. According to the Turkish government, more than 150,000 workplaces are unusable. The assessment also determines in Syria, approximately 170,000 workers have lost their jobs as a result of the earthquakes, where 12 years of civil war had already taken a huge toll on the economy and labor market. According to the ILO, this has directly affected around 154,000 households and more than 725,000 people. Burkina Faso's military government has suspended France 24 broadcast yesterday after the TV station ran an interview with the head of the Al-Qaeda terror group's North African wing. This comes as the channel aired an interview with Yazid Mubarak, head of Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, earlier this month. Mubarak has been the leader of the terror group since 2020, when French forces killed his predecessor in an operation. According to a statement from Burkina Faso's communication minister, France 24 is, quote, not only acting as a mouthpiece for these terrorists, but worse, it is providing a space to legitimize terrorist actions and hate speech. The minister says the Burkina Faso government does not contest the channel's editorial independence, but the interview put a spotlight on its professional ethics. France 24, which is run by French state-owned holding company France Médias Monde, deplored the move, saying it was based on unfounded accusations. In a statement, the French company says it, quote, only reported Mubarak's comments through a studio conversation with one of its journalists without giving him the floor directly. In December 2022, the Burkina Faso government suspended Radio France. A new study shows obvious gaps in research about anti-Muslim discrimination in healthcare settings. The study is conducted jointly by McMaster University and the Muslim Advisory Council of Canada, also known as MACC. According to Tabassum Wayne, MACC's executive director, consultation with Muslims showed that Muslims, especially women and girls, are facing discrimination in healthcare settings. Wayne says she has been a victim of indirect Islamophobia while giving birth 7 years ago. She says Muslim women and girls fear seeking medical help. She calls it a, quote, problem at hand. The study published yesterday reviews healthcare bias in Canada, the UK, and the US. The research comes after Canada is experiencing a surge in religion-based hate crimes. A heavily armed former student killed 3 young children and 3 staff in what appeared to be a carefully planned attack yesterday at a private elementary school in Nashville in the US before being shot dead by police. According to the police chief, the 28-year-old suspect has left behind a manifesto with maps of the school detailing surveillance and entry-exit points. The police chief has told the reporters the suspect was prepared for a confrontation. Armed with at least 2 assault rifles and a handgun, the suspect entered the Covenant School, a Christian academy, from a side entrance, allegedly shooting through a door. Police identified the 6 victims, saying one of the 3 children was 8 years old and 2 were aged 9. The adults were aged 60 to 61. According to data from the Gun Violence Archive, there have been 129 mass shootings in the US this year. Mass shootings are defined as incidents in which 4 or more people are shot or killed. Students at Calgary Islamic School have raised nearly $70,000 for earthquake victims in Turkey and Syria. After the devastating quakes, Nancy Ferris, a kindergarten teacher at Calgary Islamic School, teamed up with Islamic Relief Canada to raise funds for the victims. The initial goal was set at $7,500. However, in just 4 days, the students collected $13,000. Soon it reached an amount of $67,000. Ferris says the way the school community came together is touching. She has raised funds for other initiatives in the past, including Yemen. Ferris says students' compassion and generosity motivated her to continue with fundraising. The Kremlin says it regrets that the UN Security Council did not support a resolution calling for international investigation into explosions last September that ruptured the Nord Stream gas pipelines. It reiterated the Kremlin would do everything in its power to hold an international investigation. The UN Security Council on Monday did not support the Russian-Chinese resolution, which called on the UN to create an international independent commission into the act of sabotage. The resolution also demanded the identification of the perpetrators, sponsors, organizers of the sabotage, and their accomplices. Russia, China, and Brazil voted in favor of the draft resolution, while the remaining 12 council members abstained. At least 9 votes in favor are needed to pass a draft resolution in the 15-member council. The Nord Stream pipelines, which carry Russian gas to the northern Germany via the Baltic Sea, were ruptured in a series of blasts in late September last year. The blast caused leaks in what officials from countries in the region call a likely sabotage. Russia accuses the US of having direct involvement in the explosions, which severely damaged the pipelines. Washington says accusations it is behind widespread social unrest in Israel are completely and demonstrably false. The news comes after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's son alleged Washington involvement in the Israeli protests. The State Department spokesperson told reporters yesterday the notion that the US is initiating or supporting these protests is completely false. Netanyahu on Friday retweeted a post on Twitter suggesting the Biden administration is secretly supporting the demonstrations in order to overthrow his father. Another post he retweeted included an article from the far-right US news website Breitbart, suggesting the State Department is fomenting unrest in order to bring Israel to negotiations with Iran. Israel has seen mass protests over the past 12 weeks against plans by Benjamin Netanyahu's government for judicial reform, seen by the opposition as an attempt to reduce the powers of the judicial authority in favor of the executive. Netanyahu is on trial for corruption and who agreed to delay the reform yesterday, insists that his judicial plan would enhance democracy. Global outrage over Russia's invasion of Ukraine last year has only served to expose the West's double standards towards human rights abuses throughout the world, says Amnesty International. In its annual World Report for 2022, Amnesty pointed to what it described as the West's silence on Saudi Arabia's rights record, repression in Egypt, and Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. Amnesty Secretary General Agnes Callamard, while presenting the group's World Report in Paris, said the Ukraine war exposed double standards. She says it shows how the West has ignored so many other violations of the UN Charter. According to Callamard, the report shows if there is a political will to act, much can be achieved. Russia's assault began on February 24, 2022, as the West closed ranks to support Ukraine. Many countries imposed sanctions on Moscow and opened their borders to Ukrainian refugees after the invasion, while the International Criminal Court launched an investigation into war crimes in Ukraine. Amnesty says the conflict has highlighted shortcomings in responding to abuses in other parts of the globe, such as thousands of people being killed in Ethiopia, Myanmar, and Yemen. Thank you for watching. We need your support for donations. Please scan the QR code on our broadcast or go to our website, muslimnetworktv, to make a donation so that we can continue to amplify the voices of Muslims in Canada and abroad.